Okay, so I've got a couple of things I need to share with you this week. One thing which came up repeatedly this week in some conversations was reference to interaction and things like the living guestbook, sometimes known as Pearls of Wisdom. So today I thought I'd go through once again the living guestbook and explain what it is, how it works, why we use it. So the living guestbook is something that was shared with me originally by a Canadian DJ on my very first visit to Mobile Beat in Las Vegas. The idea was quite simple really, and it combines the best of pre-prepared interaction with the spontaneity which can only come from a live interactive experience. I'll begin by explaining that a traditional guestbook is often found at a wedding reception, and the idea is that that's where guests record their sentiments and their best wishes for the bride and groom. Now, often in these books, the first couple of pages are really interesting and humorous, and the messages are very creative. But once you pass through the first 2 or 3 pages, then pretty much everything that could be said has been said, and so very often the content is reduced to just 1 or 2 lines, typical best wishes, what a great day, and it just becomes like the office Christmas card. So there must be a better way for the guests to interact with the bride and groom and give them not only their thoughts on the day, but some ideas for how to have a long and happy married life. So I will suggest to my brides that using this piece of interaction during the wedding breakfast meal itself or in the evening reception during the buffet is a great way to connect and to make sure that everybody is focused and entertained. I'll use the buffet for my example. So once the food has been served and the guests are seated, I would explain to everyone that we're about to do something different. They'll have never seen this before. I explain that everybody in the room is only there because they know the bride and groom. And wouldn't it be nice if they could give them one piece of advice which could help them in their married life together? This may be advice which was shared with them when they got married, or it may be something which they learnt themselves the hard way when first living together. Either way, this advice can be practical, it can be romantic, it can be funny. In fact, it could be downright rude, and it's up to them. They will help, and they will create the right atmosphere. Now, to help them, we say there are 4 prompt cards which have been prepared, and we put these out on the tables. And on these prompt cards, it will say things like, to have a long and happy married life, I would, ... To have a long and happy married life, the one thing never to do is ... Or to have a long and happy married life, the one thing never to say is ... And finally, to have a long and happy married life, the one thing I'd like to tell the opposite sex is ... So, all the audience have to do is to complete the sentence. They also need to be aware that they need to complete the bottom of the card by telling us who they are and what their relationship is to the bride and groom. So whether they're friends, whether they're work colleagues, whether they're family members. Then I'd go on to explain that all of these cards will be placed into a folder and presented to the bride and groom later on that evening. However, what we will be doing just before we start part 2 after the food is that we'll be sharing the best of the best with our bride and grooms directly. So now it's time to distribute the cards amongst the tables and the guests and urge them to complete them in the next 15 minutes. They can do this individually or they can work as teams. Make sure you provide pens or pencils as required and remind them that they need to do this sooner rather than later because we need to get cracking with part 2. So you're allowed to interject every 5 minutes over the microphone just to make sure. What actually happens is that people will bring you their cards once that they're completed, especially those who are writing things which are a little bit rude or close to the bone. Now this is where you need to be responsible, and you need to edit the cards as you go. You will have already agreed guidelines beforehand with your bride and groom. So once you've collected the cards and selected about 10 to 20 examples, you're ready to share them with the audience. Ideally, you'll have a mix of content, sincere, humorous, some a little rude, maybe. And what you need to do is to position the bride and groom somewhere on the dance floor or at a nearby table, and then you can step out with a radio microphone in order to present the content and be in a position whereby, if necessary, if there's something there which you're not quite sure of, you can show it to the bride and groom and ask them what they think. I found it best to I found it best to name first whoever had authored the card. So something like, first one up is from Uncle Arthur. Where's Uncle Arthur? Now the reason for this is that people will know who Uncle Arthur is and where he's sitting, and they may well be pointing, waving, giving you an indication as to whereabouts in the room he is. So you may go one step further and ask Uncle Arthur himself to read what he's written. So, using a radio microphone, this is a great way of introducing him before we hear what he's got to say. Especially if you're not sure of how well received the message will be. Sometimes the sentiments, the messages written can be somewhat cryptic, or may involve in-house jokes or private jokes which you're not aware of. So very often the golden rule is, if you can get the person who wrote the comment to read it out loud, then so much better. Alternatively, you may ask a guest whether the advice is something which works for them. So, is this right? Does this work for you? Is this, you're speaking from experience here? So you present the whole thing in a very conversational way. There are a few traps to avoid. The main one being that it's not unknown for somebody to sign a card on behalf of somebody else. So that when you read a person's name, that person will be taken by surprise. They may well go red-faced and realise that someone on their table has set them up. The beauty of the Living Guestbook is that it focuses attention on the bride and groom at a time which is normally quite quiet. It works on two levels, by introducing guests to the audience as a whole, thereby identifying where the relatives are and who the work colleagues are, the neighbours are. So everybody gets to know pretty much who everybody else is in the room and where they're sat. On the other level, this reveals just what kind of people they are, and often reveals situations or events which we would otherwise not know about. So, yeah, like I said before, there are in-jokes, there are references to things which we don't know about. There might be a particular reference to sport. There could be reference to, activities, holidays, shopping, tastes. All kinds of things will come out. So be prepared and go with the flow. And it's like all impromptu stand-up comedy. You don't know where it's going to go. You will have a road plan. You will have a rough mix because you will have looked at the input, and you'll try to get a mix for, like I say, the sincere, the humorous, the slight innuendo. And the best thing I can do is to recommend that you finish with a couple of sincere pieces of advice from very close members of the family. So if mum and dad are there, and if they've written some advice, make sure you put theirs down to the bottom and make sure that those are the final bits of advice. So you're bringing the focus from around the room back to where it should be, and that's on your bride and groom. And don't forget to thank them, invite a warm round of applause for them just being a good sport, putting themselves up to this kind of interaction in what would normally have been a fairly quiet time. And I would also remind the guests that those cards which were not read out for a particular reason, probably because we couldn't repeat what was written on them. However, they should beware, because the next time they're invited round to the bride and groom's house for coffee, then that folder may well be sitting there on the coffee table, and what they've written may well come back to bite them. But once again, thanks for being good sports. So there you go, in a nutshell. It's the Living Guestbook, sometimes called Pearls of Wisdom, and very much a piece of interaction that you can do with a radio mic, with the help of the guests, getting their commitment, explaining why you're doing it, and then ending up with a folder probably of, I mean, we used to put 4 cards on a table. If you're talking about 10 or 12 tables, then you're in the region of 40 to 50 cards. Even if you only share a dozen of them, then you will have created a moment which people will remember. It's not necessarily all about dancing at a wedding reception. Hopefully that helps you. That's it for now. We'll catch you later. Bye for now.